Welcome back to Fox News reporting Judging Sotomayor. In addition to being a hard-working, driven student at Princeton and Yale Law School, Sonia Sotomayor was a member of a number of civil rights groups which alleged discrimination on those campuses. Many of her fellow law students were stunned with the first job she took out of school as a prosecutor under Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau. Sotomayor herself has said she had misgivings about taking the job. I talked about that with Morgenthau in his downtown New York City office. When you first met Sonia Sotomayor, what was your first impression?
She impressed me as being somebody who will understand the problems of victims and witnesses. We want people with judgment.
Knowing her inclination to speak up for minorities, were you surprised that she chose to become a prosecutor rather than perhaps a public defender?
There's a lot more discretion in being a prosecutor than being a defense lawyer. You have the discretion to do what you think is right. If somebody's arrested, you think it's a bad arrest, you don't prosecute it.
And indeed, Sotomayor has said that she was reluctant to prosecute what she called low-grade crimes, as she felt they could be, quote, the product of the environment and of poverty. When it came to violent crime, however, she had no such hesitation. As she noted in a 1983 interview with the New York Times, quote, the worst victims of crimes are not general society, i.e. white folks, but minorities themselves. Nevertheless, her focus on race and ethnicity as an issue makes some conservatives uneasy.
Equality means criticizing a Hispanic nominee the same way you would criticize a white nominee.
That's exactly right.
Kurt Levy is the executive director of the Committee for Justice, a group that tries to put conservative justices on the bench.
Well, it is strange that the only way she could justify being a prosecutor of Friends is to point out that minorities were victims of crime, too. I mean, again, you would hope that a prosecutor would look at the victims of crime and not care about their color.
In 1980, Sotomayor joined the board of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. In this week's hearings, conservatives will likely paint the group as far left and question Sotomayor's 12-year association with it. Is that normal for ADAs to be politically active?
I was one of the founders of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. I mean, we encourage people to get involved in community activities and go to school board meetings and so on.
In 1984, the year Sotomayor left the DA's office, the group sued the NYPD, claiming the police promotion exam was biased against Latinos and African Americans. The city settled the case, adding minorities who failed the test to the promotion list. But white officers with the same low scores were not given promotions. The white officers sued, but did not prevail in a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Sotomayor took a job at a private law firm and continued to make political connections. In 1991, at the urging of New York Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, President George H.W. Bush appointed Sotomayor judge on the U.S. District Court. Sotomayor briefly stepped into the national spotlight in 1995 when she issued an injunction that ended a 232-day-long Major League Baseball strike. In 1997, President Bill Clinton elevated her to the much more powerful U.S. Court of Appeals. Since then, she has written hundreds of opinions, which most legal analysts agree show judicial restraint, bow to precedent, and are largely uncontroversial. Not so with a number of speeches she's delivered outside her courtroom.
On the bench, her rulings are within the mainstream of American legal thinking. Decidedly left most of the time, but within the mainstream. But when she speaks at law schools, she is decidedly pushing the envelope almost as far as it could logically or ethically be pushed for a sitting life-tenured judge.
In 2001 at Cal Berkeley, Sotomayor spoke to the Latino civil rights group Raza, stating, quote, I would hope that a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experiences would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life.
She's really talking about the importance of life experiences contributing to any perspective of any judge.
Janet Moraguia is the executive director of the National Council of La Raza, which means the race. But if a white judge made those comments, what would La Raza say about that?
We would look to what that person has to say for himself or for herself. And I'm absolutely confident that she will be able to explain that comment to the satisfaction of the Senate.
Do you think that she can be a mainstream Supreme Court justice?
I absolutely believe that she can be a mainstream Supreme Court justice. This is someone who has created a very distinguished record working within the mainstream.
In a 2005 speech at Duke, Sotomayor also ridiculed the notion that the role of the judge is simply to interpret the law.
Court of Appeals is where policy is made. And I know this is on tape, and I should never say that because we don't make law, I know. Okay, I know.
Conservatives have long accused liberal judges of legislating from the bench, but they rarely, if ever, hear one of those judges apparently confess to it. Some of her critics on the right think Sotomayor's speeches at Duke, Berkeley, and elsewhere should disqualify her from the Supreme Court. At the same time, some of her supporters on the left think Sotomayor just tells it like it is. Either way, it is Sotomayor's speeches and her activism, more than her legal rulings, that seem to project most forcefully a characteristic President Obama says he prizes in judicial appointees: empathy.
I view that quality of empathy, of understanding and identifying with people's hopes and struggles as an essential ingredient for arriving at just decisions and outcomes.
That's a troublesome approach to judging that should give Americans pause, says Stuart Taylor, a respected legal commentator from National Journal magazine.
They take an oath that they will apply the law equally, do equal right to the rich and to the poor. The empathy line of argument may suggest to some, well, not really, will do better justice to the poor than to the rich. And so that's why it's troublesome, I think.
Right. A big corporation comes in a case, and if the judge is seen as empathetic, it's not often that the big corporation is the receiver of the empathy.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes the big corporation is right. Empathy shades into favoritism. It's been taken by a lot of people as meaning that the finger's on the scales a little bit.
And Megan, that is the issue. Would a Justice Sotomayor, in the name of empathy, see fit to place her thumb on the scales of justice from time to time?
Yeah, and that is exactly what the Senate Judiciary Committee will be looking into during these confirmation hearings that begin tomorrow. Hearings that in the past few decades have been plagued with controversy. That's next on Fox News Reporting.